is. Well, temptation, as we know, in all different ways, shapes, and forms, it's all around us. And it's probably a struggle for most of us. We can't get away from it. Just watch a few ads on television for all-you-can-eat food buffets and specials and all kinds of things. Well, we heard in the gospel today the famous story where Jesus was tempted by the devil. And he took him to the top of the temple and he said, all this could be yours. He asked him to turn the stone into bread. But the devil also tempts us in subtle ways and sometimes some not so subtle ways as well. But we all know we live in a society that is surrounded by temptations of all kinds, and it probably always has been in one way or another. But now in this virtual, digital age, we can see the temptations around us way more than we ever could. And society sometimes tempts us to resist the way of Christ. And sometimes our own egos or pride or other things or not thinking, tempt us to just do dumb things that we shouldn't do. I fall to that temptation sometimes myself. A couple of weeks ago when we had the extremely cold day with the freezing rain coming down and the roads were getting slick very rapidly, and they were saying, do not get out, the roads are not good, schools were closing, everything was closing. Well, I had this temptation, it's not that bad, I've got to get out and go to Sonic, I've got to do that anyway. And I'll just go to the bank while I'm out. Well, at any rate, as I was going up Western to my regular Sonic morning routine to get my Route 44 Coke Zero, the freezing rain was sticking to the windshield of the car. And I discovered very quickly that my defroster was not working. And so I had this little window, the windshield wiper, it kept shrinking till I was like this, driving down the street. So then I fell to another dumb temptation. Well, I think that the washer fluid has antifreeze in it. That will thaw the window. Flash freeze. It does not have antifreeze in it. Then it was so bad I could not see. I had to literally hang my head out the window because I couldn't pull over, and I was really scared to realize this was a dumb thing to do. But I was at the point of no return. And so when I pulled into Sonic, of course, it was closed, and so was the bank. And then I realized, well, I better scrape this off. No scraper. So I had to use a credit card, so it was not a good thing to do. I believe them now when they say, don't get out. And so, sometimes we fall to those silly kind of temptations, but that could have had a bad return if I'd had an accident or something like that. Well, resisting silly temptations like that is not easy, but the more serious ones. And I suspect that most of us are tempted in multiple ways each and every day. Probably you were tempted to say, the time changed, let's just sleep an extra hour, we'll go to 4 o'clock at St. Joe's, and then 4 o'clock comes and it gets forgotten. Well, one of the things that the city of New York decided to do several years ago was on Valentine's Day, Mayor Bloomberg said, well, we're going to pass out condoms on the subways because people are going to have relations outside of marriage anyway, and of course we should just help make it safe. Well, of course, the church, was horrified and reacted to that, and the media made the church look like a bunch of fools, but it can't face up to reality. But I think for us as the church, it's a fine line. We cannot just give in to the culture, but we can't also ignore the reality of Christ and his redemptions. But our job is to challenge the culture. And to give in and say, well, everyone's doing it anyway, is to give in to the temptation of not only the sin itself, but the sin of indifference, to challenge people to follow the way of Christ, or as the late Pope Benedict used to say, the sin of moral relativism, where we determine our own morality based on what we want, what we need, and what we think. So giving into that is feeding people's temptations rather than challenging them, and all of us, to overcome them. To just say it's unreal to think that people could possibly wait until marriage is like saying it's unreal to think that Jesus rose from the dead. It is possible. And we know that many people fall to temptations of all different kinds every single day, but later regret it, like I did driving down the road, and then it's too late. Temptation can be obvious, and then it can be much more subtle and hidden. This Lent, I decided to give up social media, which, I'm not sure, it's more of a toxic addiction than it is anything else. And so yesterday I thought, you can do what you give up on Sundays. 3 o'clock, that's closest to Sunday. I'm going to check it out anyway. Well, that's not right. And sometimes we fall to temptations. Well, temptation is that way. It's seductive. And we think, if we've fallen once, we might as well just keep going and go for broke, and we go to confession later on. When in reality, we can and should ask the Lord to help us and try to help us to stop while we're ahead. Is it easy? No. And we also know there's another big temptation that we as a culture seem to have fallen into big time, is this alarming trend to just blast anyone who doesn't agree with us. And we could do that either in person, by text or email or social media post. This is done in all sorts of ways and shapes and forms. It's easy to take our frustrations out on those around us and the tension and anger that builds up in us, or to some inanimate person that we don't even know, or even someone we love. It's easy to get really hacked off about something and then fire off an angry email or a text, or chew someone out without thinking this may not be the time or the place to do it, because in an all about me world, we don't really think about anybody else. We're the center of the universe. We all, ask an airline gate agent how it feels when the flight's delayed over and over, and the people come up and bawl them out. I've done it, you've done it, we probably all have done it. There was a guy that showed up at 9 o'clock this morning and was angry with me because I had changed the 8 o'clock mass time. And I said, well, I didn't. And he goes, well, it's not starting. I said, the clock's changed. And he said, oh, never mind. So, we've all done that. And we learn at a young age, if you get upset, just let it out. You just let them have it. But it's never too late to start again. Lent gives us that opportunity to look at our lives and see, what can we do to resist temptation? And how can we be like Jesus, be tempted and resist? Notice it says, and it's very subtle, it says, the devil left Jesus for a time. He came back. He tempted him again, just like he'll do with us. But we cannot resist temptation alone. We need God's help. And even not spending time with God in prayer is a huge temptation in a modern world. We don't have time to do that. I asked a group of kids recently how long they thought the average teen spent in prayer. And they said, I don't know, 2 to 5 minutes a day. I think I read once where it's like 3 or something like that. Lent gives us the time to get our prayer lives in order and confess our sins. Now, the temptation is to just kind of not do that, keep doing the same old thing. But giving that time to the Lord, examining our consciences, that'll have benefits not just now, but for all of eternity.